Good evening. Welcome to Live from Spaso. I am so pleased to be hosting tonight's a very special live broadcast. My name is Michelle Peterson, and I'm the Public Affairs Officer here at the U.S. Embassy. I'm going to be one of your co-moderators for the evening, along with my colleague Maria Stavropoulos, who is our Cultural Affairs Officer. Tonight's event is a conversation with Ambassador Tracy as she's wrapping up her time in Moscow. And I want to say thank you to everyone who sent in some really great questions. We're going to try to ask every single one of them over the next hour. Now, the ambassador needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce her anyways because she has truly one of the greatest biographies in the Foreign Service. Ambassador Tracy was sworn into Ambassador of the Russian Federation on January 9th, 2023, but this is her third assignment to Russia, and so we look forward to asking her about that tonight. She's a career member of the Foreign Service, and she, before this assignment, served as ambassador to the Republic of Armenia. She's held a number of leadership positions across the State Department, and she's served all across the region and around the world, including in Turkmenistan, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, and she is a recipient of the Secretary's Award for Heroism and the Distinguished Honor Award. But before we jump into our questions, Ambassador, thanks so much for opening your home tonight. I would like you to kick it off with just a few remarks to our audience.
Well, thank you, Michelle, and it's great to be here with you and Maria. You know, I've been thinking about my time coming to an end here as ambassador to the Russian Federation, and it's a moment that really feels like I've come full circle in my foreign affairs career. I arrived here in 1987 to work at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow as a contractor, and those 3 years working in the consular section were just such interesting times, times of that were portending great change for the Soviet Union, and ultimately, of course, the breakup that has given me a lot of opportunities in my career to serve in a number of places that have been so interesting. But, you know, I think coming back later as the Deputy Chief of Mission in 2014, and then obviously coming back here as ambassador in January 2023, the through lines for me have always been with my experiences in the Soviet Union and Russia. It's just been this tremendous respect and fascination with Russia's rich history, the culture, and people. I mean, I think that's one of the things that along the way, for the most part, just got better and better because when I arrived in 1987, limited contact, but it was changing. And we were expanding our ability to have contact with Soviet citizens. And then, of course, in Russia, that we've had tremendous public diplomacy programs, people-to-people contacts. And that is something that to me has been just one of the best parts of my job as an ambassador, has been the opportunity to meet and learn from Russian citizens who, fortunately, and through, especially now with all the virtual technology support that we have, we can be in touch with people here at Spaso House in person, but we've got this opportunity tonight to have people joining us in the residence in a virtual format. So I'm really happy to be here tonight.
That's really one of the best things about our Virtual American Center is that we have plenty of room in the room for everybody who wants to join. Well, I get to have the first question tonight, Ambassador, and you touched on this a little bit when you talked about, you know, being in Russia 3 times and sort of the times of change and how this past tour you've been able to meet and engage with a lot of people. So when you're looking back at, you know, your 2.5 years of service as ambassador to Russia this time, what are some of the greatest points of satisfaction or high points for you?
Well, first of all, I think I go back to something I just touched on, which is our public diplomacy programming, our outreach to young people in Russia through English language programming, the ability to help ensure that Russian students who are interested in studying in the United States have those opportunities. You know, I've said over and over again that even when government-to-government relations are at a low point, if we can keep people-to-people contacts happening, staying in touch with one another, that when the opportunities for government-to-government relations to improve, we have something to build off of. And I definitely saw that we had these opportunities during my time here and maintaining them, because there were moments when it wasn't clear we would be able to keep them going. So that for me is just a really critical point. But there are other things. I think that despite the difficulties in the relationship, we have done our best to keep the lines of communication open so that we don't misunderstand one another. We've had a change in administration with President Trump's arrival, and so there have been more channels of communication opening up, which is very important. But I'm proud that we were able in even a more difficult time to support those channels. Helping American citizens, and I think many people are aware, you know, we've had a number of Americans detained here in Russia, and it's good to see that a number of them have been able to go home. Some Russians have been able to come back here. But, you know, for us, the safety and security of American citizens is an absolute mandate. And so I've been very proud of that. And then adding stability to our operations. And some people might wonder why that matters. I think there's a good awareness that both embassies have been under a lot of strain, partly because of the relationship and the place, where the bilateral relationship is. But I think that we have been able to add stability for both missions, particularly the recent rounds of talks that we've had. We've been able to make some modest progress. And so I feel very good about that as we come to at least to the end of my tenure.
Thank you, Ambassador. There's certainly some notable achievements over the last 2.5 years, and I can attest personally to your support and trust in the power of cultural outreach and your enthusiasm for public diplomacy, so thank you for that. As you look at the past 2.5 years, what would you like to have seen done differently? What would you approach in a different manner during your assignment?
Well, I don't know if I would approach this in a different manner, but I think what I wish that I had seen, where I have a regret, is that we have not yet achieved an end to the fighting in Ukraine. And this is something that President Trump is been very vocal about, that the killing should stop, the fighting should stop. And it's certainly a very complex situation, but the first and most important step can be an end to the fighting, and then let diplomacy do its work, and to preserve lives. We've seen more than 1 million people who have either been killed or injured, and that's a tremendous loss. It's a loss for Russia and its future, for the futures of those individuals. And this is where I certainly hope in the coming weeks and months that we can see an end to the fighting, and to allow, as I say, diplomacy to do its work and find a lasting and just settlement to the conflict.
It's really well said, Ambassador. You know, I think from President Trump to Secretary Rubio, they've been really clear that, you know, it's diplomacy that's going to bring an end to this conflict, stopping the fighting, getting the parties to talk.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of leads into one of the next questions that I have, because you've got the experience of serving, you know, in Moscow and in the region 3 different times as a diplomat, doing diplomacy from a more junior to our most senior level. So what are some of the lessons learned about diplomacy that, you know, you would share to those people who are trying, you know, going to be in the future, hopefully working toward a better bilateral relationship between the United States and Russia?
Well, first of all, you've said it. I've been here 3 times, and I think when you're dealing with a country that is as big in size and complexity as Russia, when you're talking about a country that has a leading role in so many dimensions. Russia is a nuclear power. It is an Arctic power. It is a European power. I mean, Russia has so many important dimensions on the global stage, and so and it has a huge internal life. It's, you know, when you look at the culture and its richness, there is always a learning process when it comes to Russia. One never can really stop. But I think you have to start and you have to keep at it. And that, as a diplomat, and certainly when one is considering some of these big assignments in a country like Russia, it is really to spend time not just on the talking points of the policy, because that only gets you so far. You have to have something behind that, and that comes from spending time getting out, visiting the sites that are important to the host country, talking to people, and coming back multiple times, especially in a country, again, as diverse and in its size and complexity as Russia is. So that's one thing that I would really encourage people to think about if you want to be a diplomat. There are many things, but one other thing that I have really tried to practice as a diplomat, and that is to try to listen as much as I speak, maybe listen more than I speak, because that's where you get, for me, that's where I get my ideas of how to find solutions to problems. I have to listen, not just speak.
That is very sage advice for all of us.
For all of us.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
And thanks for that overview. As we zoom into your last tour in Russia, these last 2.5 years, the Ukraine war, as you mentioned, has dominated U.S.-Russia relations. How would you say has it affected your work that you've done here in the last 2.5 years? And what are your thoughts, if you could give us a little more detail on the prospects of a future peace settlement that President Trump is pursuing?
Well, you know, I think the impact of the war in Ukraine is one that is much larger than just from February 2022. When I arrived in Russia in the summer of 2014, there had already been the annexation of Crimea and the destabilization of the Donbass. And so this had already been affecting our bilateral relationship, our government-to-government relationship. But when I came back in 2023, the situation had clearly deteriorated. And I think there's probably not a time in recent memory of more profound tension in the relationship. And that presented enormous challenges, some of them just having some sort of regular professional contact with the host government to make sure that we were maintaining lines of communication. I think that was achieved, but it was not always easy to do that. And because of the hostility in the relationship, it brought pressures on our public diplomacy programming, pressures to end activities, it brought pressure on our embassy life, which made just carrying out normal diplomatic duties very difficult. And I know the Russian embassy, the Russian mission in the United States, you know, has similar concerns about their time. And I think one of the things that we've really talked about between our governments is the importance and the need to make progress in restoring some basic functionality to both of our missions. But the lack of it has made it harder to do everything else that is normal diplomatic work. and at a time when, as I said, there is such a need for diplomacy. With respect to the Ukraine and what's ahead, I think that I've touched on that already in the sense of that the first point really is to stop the fighting, because then diplomats, leaders can focus on crafting longer-term solutions without the next blast or attack disrupting talks and negotiations. But I fully acknowledge it's complex, and there are many layers to this. But I think that, again, in the interest of saving lives, of preserving the futures of young people, both in Russia and Ukraine, the best step forward would still be first stop, then talk.
I couldn't agree more. Turning back to something that you said just a minute ago about this being a challenging environment for bilateral relations, where we've had, real deterioration over time, and you've come back and you've seen that. It actually connects really well to one of the questions from our audience, Ruslan, and he had asked you about, how you see the work of an ambassador in a country, where the United States is having a temporary state of political confrontation. And you talked a little bit about that, and I'd love to hear more of your thoughts. And the other part of his question was, which I thought was really interesting, is whether you see an improvement in relations between Russia and the United States in the near future, and if so, how would that happen?
Well, as I said, I think as a diplomat, it's so important to listen, and that is certainly something that I have tried to make a practice in my time. But you have to also have some knowledge, some context to understand what you're hearing, what the listening is bringing to you. And so that's why, for anyone who's interested in the work of diplomacy, I come back to the advice to make investments in learning history of an area or a country that you're particularly interested in-person visits that give you exposure to culture. Language, obviously, is a way in that for those that don't have the language capacity, it's a barrier, because there's just things that are said in a local language that sometimes have no immediate translation. So it's really about preparation, not just winging it. It's not to say that one can't find oneself suddenly thrown into the deep end, and you have to be ready for those moments. And Michelle and Maria, I'm looking at both of you. I think we've all been in those moments where somebody rushes in and says, you have to go to a meeting in the next 5 minutes. There's some urgent call, and but that's where all the preparation and work at your knowledge of the local context, of knowing the policy, it means you're prepared when things do happen on short notice. And believe me, in diplomacy, they definitely happen on short notice. With respect to where we are now and what might happen in the future, I'm an optimist. I think that eventually, that the relationship will improve. It's hard to say what the time frame is. Certainly President Trump, I think, is expressing an interest in a better relationship with Russia. I think he is also, as has Secretary Rubio said, though, we need to work on Ukraine and get the conflict settled, and that opens up a lot more opportunities. But I do believe over the long run that we will have a chance to have relations improve between our governments, and certainly more contact opportunities between Americans and Russians.
I think most diplomats, US or otherwise, would relate to your optimism. I think we all are optimists to be doing this job. And we relate to this being thrown into a situation where we have to improvise or relate to someone that might be different from us. And related to Ruslan's question, we got another question from Valeri that asks about people-to-people relationships that are unofficial. And his question is, what are some innovative ways that you think young people in both the US and Russia could connect and work together to build understanding and cooperation beyond traditional diplomacy?
Well, I think that one of the things that we're doing that I hope is giving a jump for Russians is our English language programming, because the tools that we have now virtually for people to connect have expanded tremendously. I think COVID, if you look for silver linings, I think one of the silver linings of COVID is that we found out that there's a lot more ways for us to connect. And, in our public diplomacy programming, we give people these starts, again, English language training, or some first contact with an American university or college. But what we then really like to encourage is that, we step out and the people-to-people contact or the institutions-to-institutional contacts continue. I don't know if that's innovative, because some of these feel like tried and true methods of pursuing contacts. But I think one of the biggest innovations of the last 10 years is the opportunities to meet and collaborate online and to build off of that. And that's what I would just encourage, young people to continue doing. Of course, I would like to see us come to a point in time when we are able to have more Americans visiting Russia. That's not possible right now because of the conditions that we've had with Americans who have been detained and wrongfully detained. And so we have a travel this is the highest level of a travel warning. I would love to see that changed, but it's going to take time. So in the meanwhile, what I really am glad is that we have these other opportunities through the internet, through virtual tools to try to build bridges.
Ambassador, it almost sounds like you're making a perfect advertisement for the Virtual American Center's suite of activities, the weekly conversation club, the speaker series that we have. There's a lot happening online, connecting with American experts who are, joining from the United States, talking with Russians. And, you mentioned learning English. That's, I think, always been popular and a big priority. And it actually connects to a question that we got from Dimitri. And Dimitri, I don't know how the tone you meant when you sent this question, but I liked it a lot, because he wanted to know, besides Russian, what other foreign languages do you speak? And do you really speak all the languages of the countries you worked in?
So I have spoken Russian here in Russia, and I used my Russian when I was serving in Central Asia, in Armenia, and in those countries, I did also try to learn some of the local language, whether it was particularly because my most recent post before Russia was Armenia. But I think I probably never was quite as, I know I wasn't as proficient in Armenia, let's say, as Russian, because I've been using Russian for many more years. I learned Dari before I went to Peshawar, my very first assignment in the Foreign Service, which 1995, I was the Afghanistan watcher in Peshawar because the embassy in Kabul was closed, and that was a humbling experience. Yes, because somehow, I already knew Russian at the time I started learning Dari, but not only jumping to a different alphabet, but but a language that is read in the opposite direction from which I'm accustomed. It took a while for my brain to make that shift. It did eventually, but I haven't. It's been a while since I've served in those areas, Afghanistan or Pakistan, where the Dari would be helpful. And I think this is something that I'll just encourage anybody who is learning languages, is that to look for ways to try to keep those fresh, because when you're not, and especially when you're not in the environment where it's being spoken every day, it is harder. That's what's been great about being back in Russia for a third time. It's helped me revive all of the knowledge and skill that got tucked away in my brain when I was serving in other places where Russian was not spoken.
And I imagine speaking a language when you're serving at a post unlocks so many secrets to the history and culture of the place where you are, and helps you connect with people even more.
Yes.
And that's a perfect segue to a question from Dima, another audience member, who asked, "Ma'am, you've traveled and lived in so many places. How have your views on life changed over the years, depending on your whereabouts and what you've seen?"
It's a great question. I'm from a small town in Ohio. Growing up, we didn't travel very much at all beyond our state borders. Maybe I think we traveled to West Virginia, which is a neighboring state to Ohio. But by and large, we didn't go very far away from our home area. So as a young person coming and visiting the Soviet Union in 1985, it was a huge change for me. And I'm amazed my parents allowed me to go. I was already in college. I was in my Soviet studies program, and they supported me in my idea that it was time to visit in person the place that I was studying. And it was the beginning of just a series of opportunities to expand my horizon through travel, through, and not just visiting, but living and working in a number of countries. And I think that, what that did for me, and I think this is true for many people, it expanded my horizons. To the question about how did it change my life perspective, it gave me a chance to hear from people with living under different political systems, living with a different faith as the majority faith of the country, and adapting to that, and learning about it and respecting it in ways that as I say, being in a small town was not possible. And that's what as I think about my career, it's something that I really appreciate, is that I have these just really broad horizons now that I didn't begin my life with.
It really is an honor to get to serve your country. I had never left the United States before I became a U.S. diplomat, and I will never forget that first time leaving to go to another country.
Oh, Michelle, I forgot to mention, though, I should say, when I was expanding my horizons. So I've told people this in different stories. I think it's okay for me to share it now, and hopefully I won't get into trouble. But, I grew up in Ohio. And then when I was a teenager, we moved to the state of Georgia in the South. And I do tell people that was my first foreign culture shock.
It really can be, though, like the U.S. states, and they really have distinct cultures.
We have very different cultures, but it was wonderful. And it actually, I should have cited that as my first preparation for the Foreign Service.
State, but not the country of Georgia. That would be
no, state of Georgia.
Well, when we're talking about your travels, our online audience had a lot of questions about things that you liked or didn't like in Russia. And I really like this question from Carolina, because I know you're going to have a lot to say about it. And she asks, "Dear Ambassador, will you miss the Moscow metro?"
Yes, exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation
point. You need to tell us more about that.
So, I think it's just, talking about through lines of my experiences in living and working in Moscow, I have never lost my love of traveling on the metro. There is a fascination there. I mean, I go on the metro just to get from point A to point B, but I have done multiple Moscow metro tours because of the fact that there are so many stations that are each one of them mini museums with a story of the architecture, the painting, the circumstances under which it was created. And one of the things that I have really loved about the tours is that it has also given me then an eye for details that I just didn't understand before that. But I've been on several metro systems in the United States. I've been on metro systems in Europe, and for me, Moscow is the best metro system in the world. It's efficient, it's comfortable, it's easy to navigate. So I'm sure somebody's going to take like a clip of this, and that will be the ad for the Moscow metro system. But I just think this is something that Russians should be really proud of. And one of the things that I also noticed over and over again is that the investment in the system, which is, I think, very important. The system has obviously grown since I was here in 1987, and it's a sign of how the city is growing too. But it's just, it is something I will miss very much.
I have to say the same, and I completely agree with you. I'm impressed every time I walk out of that train and look up. This question from Slava is along the same vein, and he asks, you've traveled a lot throughout Russia, both during your time here when it was the Soviet Union, your time here as TCM, and currently. What made a big impression on you through your travels about Russian society or Russian traditions, and what surprised you the most?
Well, this tour, I have not had as many opportunities to travel as widely, but when I was here, especially when I was here as the deputy, I certainly went to a number of places, the length and breadth of the country, because I got to Vladivostok, I went and visited Yakutsk, Perm, Yekaterinburg, Sakhalin, Chelyabinsk, and I think it wasn't so much a surprise to me, but it is just to see that what I really appreciated was seeing the lives of Russians outside of the big cities. It was a reminder to me that there is more to Russia than Moscow and St. Petersburg, which are justly so very important places. But I think to understand a country, to appreciate it, especially one of Russia's size and complexity, you have to have some of these wider travels. I think I also was a little surprised maybe when I went to Yakutsk in March and it was minus 30. And the person who met me at the airport said, "Welcome, you're here just in time for spring." Thank goodness I come prepared with my winter coat because minus 30 sure didn't feel like spring to me. So that was a little surprise, but I loved it. And one of the things that I also saw there, again, not a surprise, but an appreciation, was meeting a community that had been very invested in contacts with communities in the United States, especially Alaska, because we had indigenous contacts. And those were the things that I really appreciated discovering through travel in Russia.
I hope you were prepared for that cold arrival. I remember going to St. Petersburg, and I think it was like May of one year, and then it snowed and we weren't prepared, but I should have known that you can have cold weather just about any time. Well, we're talking about travel and culture. we can't not talk about food. And Vlada wants to know, and I'm sure this is going to cause a great debate online. What is your favorite dish from the Russian national cuisine?
Well, I think I'm going to be very boring and not surprise anybody with my choices. I love borscht. I love pelmeni, and they have to come with sour cream, because this is something else that I'm really going to miss here is sour cream. It's not possible to have sour cream that is of the quality that is to be found here. And but I think one of the reasons these are some of the things. Well, pelmeni is not a soup, but I like soups, and so okroshka. I mean, I think Russia has a great tradition of soups, and that's one of the things that in the Russian tradition of cuisine has really appealed to me.
I've also caught the smetana bug. I can ask my husband. I put it on everything. While we're on the theme of culture, Lily, I would like to know, please tell us about your favorite Soviet or Russian film.
So I think I probably have two that I'll mention. One is a little heavy and is more serious, and that is Leviathan, which talks about, this is the film from 2014, and I had just arrived in Russia when the film came out, when I was the deputy. So I think it came in a moment that one just felt very powerful to me. The focus on corruption, the impact that it had on the lives of the characters in this film. And they were themes that were universal, because you could see, certainly for me, the issues of corruption are not limited to one place, and the need to I think my own takeaway was the need to continue to fight against corruption. To try to ensure that when people are in the court system, that they feel like they have a fair shake. I think this is something that democracies, strive for. It's not always perfect. Certainly in our system, it is something we strive for. And again, not perfection, but I think this importance of the message about corruption for me, and the need to keep striving for something better was, for me, why that film really resonated. Something a little lighter, and that is Moscow Does Not Believe in Tears, because I think that it's obviously, it's a story of friendship. It's a story of romance. It's a story of promise. And I liked all of those elements. And sometimes when you've seen something, or, you have other things that are very heavy, having something like that. And I think, obviously, these are both great Russian films that have been recognized inside the country and outside the country as at the top of the performance of the top standard of films. But both of those were just two that I really, really appreciated in very different ways.
Good choices.
Those are two classics from different eras, for sure.
Exactly.
When we talk about books, Ambassador, I will confess I've been slowly making my way through Anna Karenina, and it's so great. And I don't know why, and maybe this age of distractions, that I don't just sit down and finish it, but maybe by the end of my tour, I'm going to make it all the way from, beginning to end. And we recently visited the Lermontov House Museum, so I know you are also interested in Russian literature, whether it's poetry or novels. Do you have a favorite book, or is there something you managed to reread during your tenure when you were here?
So I think, like you, I have been going back and rereading. And the story that has continued to fascinate me is The Master and Margarita.
Because we're in the room of the book.
And living living in Spaso House with its connections to Bulgakov and to the scene that inspired Bulgakov for the Satan's Ball or the Ball of the Full Spring Moon. There's different, it was called by the embassy the Ball of the Full Spring Moon, but in the book it's called Satan's Ball. But Maria and I had a chance to visit Bulgakov's, one of the places that he lived in Moscow, his apartment museum on the Garden Ring Road, not far from the Tchaikovsky Concert Hall, and seeing, this literary giant and the conditions that he was facing. It was a communal apartment, and thinking about how that affected his ability to write. Some people thrive under tremendous pressures. Others, it goes in the opposite direction. But clearly, Bulgakov faced a lot of pressures, not just from the physical living circumstances, but also from the political pressures of the time that he was in. And so, for me, it's timeless, this story, and it's been a privilege to live in this residence and see this piece of history and connection to Bulgakov. And we see groups that stop all the time in front of Spaso House. And I understand from local guides, this is the draw, the connection to Bulgakov and his time as a guest here at Spaso House.
It's such a beautiful building. As you walk by, it's hard not to look up and take a picture. We got so many great questions from the audience about your experiences here and your favorite Russian cuisines and movies and music. But one question I really like that we got from an audience member was about your impression when you first arrived in Russia in 1987, when you stepped off the plane.
Oh, gosh. It's, and I feel a little, as I'm thinking about how to convey a memory from that time, it was one of the feeling that things were changing here. Mm-hmm. I think that, when I think back to what I remember the most, it was, and I've talked about this also in some past conversations, but when Nikolai Bukharin was rehabilitated, it just electrified Moscow and other places across the country, because people took it as a sign that things were changing, things were opening up, and even at the embassy at the time we felt it, and it was something that created a feeling of positive momentum, of opening up, and one of the I think aspects of that over the time then that I was here is that we were being allowed to travel more and more inside the Soviet Union. Obviously, we had been able to go to Leningrad, where we had a consulate, but other cities were closed to us, and those started to open, which was exciting. I took a number of trips, especially by train, which is something that I have always loved about Russia and the Soviet Union, is the chance to travel by train. But as I say, 1987, it was just that things were beginning to change is probably the biggest impression when I think about that first early contact.
Thank you.
So when you think back to your first tour, and you've come back 2 more times, Have you ever gone back to any of the places perhaps that you visited outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg and seen any big changes there? Or, I don't know, it's a big country and there's a lot of places. But I mean, just even for me, I've served twice in Moscow, and it wasn't so long ago that I was here before, but coming back a second time, just seeing how Moscow is even more connected, new metro stations, just more high tech than it was before.
You know, one of my favorite parks in Moscow is Kolomenskaya. And I never get tired of going there, but definitely changes. You know, from when I first visited there in the 80s, and then I came back to see that at one end of the park there had been a recreated palace from the early Romanov period that had later been dismantled by, I think it was by Catherine the Great, but you know, but it had been recreated, and it took me a while to see that and orient myself. But I think the other end of the park and what was is to see the St. John's Church that was operating probably under difficulty, but definitely operating, I think, with less pressure, and certainly that's the case now. And then the fact that the history of the Russian Orthodox Church, the infrastructure of the Russian Orthodox Church was being cared for, restored, because you know, one of the things that I saw in the 1980s were churches that were either storage places, cinema places. I mean, and this is something, you know, I've heard through, you know, my chances to go about Moscow. And I think that's really wonderful that this piece of Russia's culture and history has been reclaimed and is operating. But that, for me, that particular site that I have visited so often is a place where I really do see some significant changes. Yeah. Yes, but still the core intact. But I think by and large for the better.
How wonderful that you were able to visit it at different points since
Yeah.
its evolution. There's one more question I want to ask from our audience members, and that is, what are your personal highlights, or one personal highlight from your time in Russia? And that could be from all three tours, or you can pick something from the last 2.5 years.
You know, I think one of the highlights was really when my family came here and visited me. And actually they visited me multiple times, but we traveled to around Moscow. We made trips to St. Petersburg. One of the trips that we made to St. Petersburg, we added, it was the summertime, and we added a side trip to Veliki Novgorod. And I just, that is still for me an absolute highlight, because it showed me a part of Russia's medieval history, the pride that people take in the origins of democracy there, the literacy, and that was a really special trip. But I have to say, you asked me a hard question, because finding just one place or one experience is difficult, because there are many, especially when it comes to picking and choosing among museums or cultural performances. I have benefited from visiting so many of these places that are treasures, or seeing a performance at the Bolshoi or the Mariinsky Theater. Yeah, it's there. It's, you really asked me an impossible question, Maria.
Maria,
Good
impossible question. You're gonna get marked down for that. You know, we've talked a lot about Russia's culture and history and treasures. I want to ask you about some American culture and history and treasure before we close, because it's right behind us here. One of the most beautiful quilts that I've ever seen, and I know that that's a personal interest of yours, and that we recently had an event here at the embassy where we were able to showcase American quilt culture and the intersections with Russian patchwork tradition. And there's a quilt festival going on right now in the middle of Moscow. So, Ambassador, can you tell us a little bit about this quilt and just a few words about, you know, your interest in quilting?
So I'm from, as I said, I'm from Ohio, and we have a very large Amish and Mennonite community in Ohio, and quilting is a big part of the life of these communities. They're right next door to where I grew up. And as I was continuing on in the Foreign Service and more, you know, serving in positions where I was officially entertaining people, representing my country, I realized, you know, that I was looking for a way to show people something about my home area. And I decided on quilting, partly because I've always loved quilts, but what you know, as I lived in other cultures and I was seeing textile traditions in other cultures, I saw the connections and I thought, this is a way for me to bring something of my home area, a textile tradition to share with host country visitors and guests when they came to my home. And this quilt came to me because one of the ways that I have managed to acquire quilts has been to attend an auction that the Mennonite community in Ohio holds every year to raise money for humanitarian purposes. So people make quilts, they donate them, and then they auction them off, and the money that is raised goes for humanitarian purposes, which is a great story as well. And so when I saw this quilt, I was just sure that I was the only person who saw this quilt who was interested. And then I found out in the bidding I was not the only
Bidding war.
who was interested. And I nearly dropped, well, I did drop out. And then I happened to be sitting next to the lady who had made the quilt. Oh. And she said, don't drop out, that's my quilt. So I got back in, and well, as you can see, the rest is history. I won the bidding war, and it's been wonderful to have. The quilt is called Fireworks, but it's just one of several pieces that I have that I've had a privilege to have here in Spaso House as a part of the art here. But as Michelle, as you were saying, you know, one of the other things that we've done with these quilts is to connect to the quilting tradition in Russia. And Maria has just been fabulous in her efforts to help bring those traditions together. We had an exhibition where we were showing my quilts along with Russian quilts. And again, these are the kinds of moments when I'm reminded of what we have in common, and where we can build bridges. It doesn't mean that we're not going to disagree on other topics, but I think when we also find things in common that we can build off of, it helps when we then have to have conversations where we are also disagreeing, sometimes very, very vigorously, but I think we also then with these bridges hopefully can find ways to keep talking despite our disagreements and different points of view.
That was a wonderful event and a wonderful opportunity to open Spaso for Russians and Americans to celebrate ways that our cultures dovetail. I think everyone enjoyed it. We have time for one last question, and that is, what is next for you after Moscow, Ambassador Tracy?
Well, this departure has been long planned, and I am going to be retiring from the Foreign Service and spending more time with my family, because after 30 plus years of living and working mostly overseas, and in some very, very difficult places where my family supported me, always made me feel that I had their backing in my choices in my diplomatic career. This is an opportunity for me to give back to them. As I said, it's been planned for a while, and so that's the next step. And then we'll see what happens after that.
Ambassador Tracy, I think your family will be glad to have you back after so many years of service and sacrifice. I want to thank you for taking the time to participate in tonight's event, because your schedule is action-packed as you're drawing to a close. I also want to thank you on a personal level for inspiring me to be the best diplomat that I can be, and the legacy that your service and your career has brought to so many, a whole generation of other diplomats. And I want to say thank you to our audience for tuning in. We're so glad that you could join us, and we hope if you enjoyed tonight's program, you'll check out the other programs and opportunities that we have on our virtual American Center. So thank you all very much, and this is good night from Spaso House, unless Ambassador, you'd like any final closing words to finish us off.
Michelle, thank you, and Maria, thank you, because it has been wonderful working with both of you, because you also are so committed to the idea of public diplomacy and outreach and staying connected to Russians, especially young Russians. And that's my, I think, closing message, that we just have to keep on working on how we stay connected, keep working on some of the hard problems and solving them. I think diplomacy is the way for that. But let me just say, it's been such a privilege to serve here as the U.S. Ambassador to the Russian Federation, and given me one more opportunity to live and work in a country that has so much beauty and tradition and hospitality to offer. And I have been very appreciative of all that I have received from so many Russians who have made me feel welcome. So thank you.
Thank you.